Welcome to day 2 of the Learn Practical Web Development in 20 Hours. So yesterday, which was the day 1, we discussed about HTML. Now today, which is day 2 of the webinar, we'll be looking at CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. CSS is the language we use to style an HTML documents. CSS describes how HTML elements should be displayed. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Each row consists of a selector and a declaration, which in turn is made up of a property and a value. CSS allows to control all the aspects of the visualization and some other features in our web page, such as colors, margins, position, sizes, and behavior. When I say colors, you can change the contents, the color contents of your document and your web page. You can change the background color of your web page. You can add colors to your borders. You can add border colors to your elements on your web page. You can also give margin to your web page. You can position elements anywhere you like on your web page using CSS. And you can also change the width and height of an element with CSS. You can also change the mouse over effects on your web page using CSS. By using CSS, you can also control the text formatting. You can control location on the page. You can eliminate the need for tables as a layout tool. You can create logos using just text instead of having to rely on graphics. CSS can be applied to a page in 3 ways. The first one is using the inline CSS, that is inline as a part of HTML tag. So you can add your CSS inside the HTML tag. I will show us this shortly. You can also add CSS inside the page by declaring a style tag. You can also have a separate file. That the web page can access. Now, this is a CSS syntax. Look at this P here. This P stands for a paragraph, but this P in CSS means selector, followed by a curly bracket which was closed here. Then the properties, color, and the value, red. Text align, center. This can be written well, like this, what I have in my slide here. I have the P tag, then opening a declaration block, then color red, text align, center. Color red, text align, center. So what is telling us that this will change all the P tags in my web page. So in all the paragraph tag in my web page, we have a color of red with the text aligned to be at the center. I will show us this shortly soon. It's an example of a CSS declaration. We have the H1. We give it a color of blue. Then if you want to add a comment in CSS, we use this symbol, /*, then close it by star and /. So what I've done here is that the H1 in my web page, the color of the H1 will be blue. Then it's going to have a font of 18 pixels and the area. The font size will be 18 pixels and the font family will be area. Then it's going to have a margin all around it, 15 pixels, and having a background color of light pink. I will just show you this in my VS Code now, so you can see how CSS work. I will go to my code. I will go to my code. And open my VS Code. So let me open my VS Code. So I'm on my VS Code now. So still on the yes, this is my VS Code screen now. This was where we stopped yesterday. So I want to just decorate this H1 here. So I'm just going to come to my, I'll show you how CSS works. I will type the selector, which is H1. Then we give the color of the H1 to be blue. Then also we gave the H1 a margin of 15 pixels. Then what did you have again? We gave it font. Yes, what we are using now is not inline. Rather, we are using the internal style sheet, the internal way of using CSS. The internal, we have 3 types: the inline, the internal, and the external. So the inline is always included inside the H1, inside the HTML tag. I will show you this. I will show you this example. Then what I'm using now is an internal styling. Internal. So we gave it a font of 18 and area and background color of light pink. So font is a shorthand for writing the font size and the font family. The background color of this, I have light pink. This means that all the H1 in my web page here should have these properties given to it. Now, if I check, my H1 is only Learn Web Development Online. So if I should go to my live server now and open this, go live. So this will trigger my browser. Then I'm going to share you my browser screen and let's check the H1. Now, look at the H1. This is the H1 here, which is having a background color of light pink and a margin of 15 pixels at the top, at the left, at the right, and at the bottom. Then the font was changed to Arial and the font size reduced to 18 pixels. So this is an example of how CSS work. You can see this is how CSS work. You have the selector, followed by the declaration block, then followed by the properties you want to use. We have thousands of properties in CSS, but the common ones are what I'll be using here so that you're going to see how to decorate your web page. Now, how to add CSS? The first one is using the style attributes, which we call inline styling. So inside the element itself, we give it the style attribute, then put our properties inside it. I will show us this now. Then we can also create a style tag, which we have what we've just done recently in my VS Code. P, which is the selector, then give it a color of blue. Then also we can reference an external CSS file. So using the link tag. So let me just show us this. So for instance, I've used the H1 here, which is the internal styling using the style tag. You can see I open the style tag below the title tag in my HTML. And all these style tags are included inside the head tag. Now, the next thing is that I want to style the paragraph here using the style attribute, which is inline styling. So I'm going to give the paragraph a background color of yellow. Background color of yellow. So let's check it out and see if we have this to be yellow in my web page. So I'll go to my browser and check it out. Perfect. I have the yellow color because I'm using an inline styling. You can see, but here I'm using the internal styling. And the other way that we have is by inserting an external style sheet, which is the focus of this webinar. We'll be using an external style sheet. Reason is because it tends to load our web page faster. And it also enables us to be able to see, to have a different file for our documents. Everything will not be together on the same page. Now, there's hierarchy of styling. What if you use external style sheets, internal style sheets, and inline style sheets on a tag? Which one do you think will override one for one? Now let's see it in action. So I'm just going to create an external style sheet in my Explorer here. So I'll just create style.css because .css is the extension name for a CSS file. Now I'm going to look for a element I want to style. Now look at this paragraph here. It has a background color of yellow. Then I'm going to come to my style, internal style here, and give the P also a background color of blue. Then the next thing, I will go to my external style sheet here and give the same P a background color of let me just say brown. Now I'm having 3 declarations for just one tag. Now this tag will not work unless I link it with my HTML page. So I will go below my title tag and put link. Then the name of the style of the style sheet is style.css. So this is how it's being written. So if you have this, then I can now see. Now let me ask the question now. You have a P that was given yellow here. The same P was given blue here, and the same P was given brown here. Now, what do you think the P will show to us on the browser? Is it blue or yellow or brown? Can you just guess on the charts? on the chart, can you tell me the answer? Just guess. I'm giving the paragraph tag 3. Okay, someone said blue. Okay, let's see. Remember? Okay, good. Someone said blue again. Now, remember, this is yellow here, the inline styling, and here, the internal style, we give it a blue, and the external style, we give it a brown. Now, let's see if we are correct. That is why we need to understand the hierarchy of CSS styling. You can see we have yellow. We have yellow. Now we have yellow. This is what I'm after. We have yellow because this is the paragraph I'm talking about. This paragraph, we gave it a yellow, which was a inline styling. Inline styling. Then we have the blue here. Then we also have the brown here. Now let me explain to us. Yes, because it's an inline styling, yes. So in CSS, when style information for one site is located in all the 3 places, the external style sheets affect the entire site. The internal style affects only their own pages and override external styles, while the inline styles affect only their own tags and override both internal and external styles. So the inline styles override the internal and external styles. So that's how it works. So when you use inline style, it's going to affect its own tag and override any other ways we have provided our style sheets. Thank you. To take full advantage of CSS, the style sheet for a site should be in an external file so that any changes made there will apply throughout the sites. This also means that only one style document has to be downloaded for a single site, making the pages load faster. Now, I have a question here. Someone is asking me that, so for inline style, there will be no need to create a file. No, you should create a file. The most appropriate way to do it is to create an external document for your web page. So then you now style the site with a single CSS file. But in some cases whereby you need to override the external style sheets, you can go directly into your tag, your HTML tag, and give it inline styling. So this will override the external style sheets that you have created. But one advantage of using the external style sheets is that it's going to make the pages load faster. Now, the most common place to put style information is in an external document that each page of a website points to directly. Any changes made to this single document will then be applied throughout the entire website as each page is accessed by users. Thank you. So the external style sheets have a .css extension. So when you are saving your CSS file, you have to use .css extension on it, just as you did for your HTML. .html. Now we have some list of most common CSS property and example. Like I said, we have thousands of CSS properties, but few will be looked into here, and we are going to be using them in our webinar projects. In the practical section of the webinar, we'll be using all these most common CSS property, such as color. So if you want to specify color, color can come as hexadecimal value, or the color name itself, or the RGBA way of writing color. RGBA means the red, green, blue, and the opacity, which is the alpha. When you see RGB, you're talking about the red, green, blue value of the of a color. So by default, 255 is the highest. So we know we have secondary color and primary color. So this red, green, blue, they are the primary colors that we have to use to create other colors in CSS. Now we have the background color, which you can change it to red. We can also add background image to our elements. We can also change the fonts. The font size is this, and the font family is Tahoma. We can give border to our CSS using border, the 1 pixel solid and black. You can add border top. You can give it a border radius. That curve, when you see a button that have a curve, border radius was what was used there. Then you can give it a margin, padding. Now, margin and padding is two things that used to confuse students learning web development. So in this webinar, I'm going to simplify how you can understand margin and padding to you in a way that you will easily comprehend. Width, we can also change the width of an element by specifying it in any units like percentage, pixels, or EM. We can also change heights, the text. We can also change the alignment of the contents either by center align, left align, or right align, or justify contents. The box shadow. The box shadow can also be used to add a shadow effect on our elements. Then the cursor pointer is also a properties of CSS. Then display. You can change the display of elements either by display block or display inline block or display inline. Overflow hidden. Here is a list of the most common CSS properties. Animation. Animation will make you create an animating element. Background. It sets the background of an element. Margin, which sets the margin outside the spacing for elements. And padding, we set the spacing between content of the element border. Now, margin is set. Margin will set the outside spacing, while padding will set the inside spacing. You will get to see this in action soon. Opacity. We can set the transparency of an element using the opacity property. Line height. We can set the line height, which is the vertical spacing between lines of text. Box shadow. This adds a shadow effect to an element. Text align. It sets the alignment of text inside an element. Then also we have display, which specify an element's display behavior. It can be display block, inline, or inline block. The font style, which sets the fonts to either normal, italic, or oblique. Then cursor, which specifies the shape of the mouse cursor. We also have border. We can specify borders for an element using the border property. Then grid. Grid defines the grid layout with responsive rows and columns. So we use grid to lay out our web page. We also have position property, which sets the elements positioning method. The Z index is used to set the vertical stacking order relative to other elements. This example can be related to when you have a set of playing cards All of us here know what we call the cards. This is Jack, Queen, these sets of cards. Now, when you stack them on each other, we can also stack elements on each other using Z index. Then we have the text transform, which defines the text capitalization or casing. Then we have the media query, which applies media queries to a page using the add media property. Now, there is need to talk about selectors in CSS. CSS selectors are used to select the content you want to style. For instance, you saw when I wanted to change the P tag of my elements in my VS Code 10, I used the P selector. So the P selector will affect all the P in my web page. So if we want to change one specific tag, not all the tags of the same type. So we use the selectors for it. So we can specify more precise selectors besides the name of the tag using the class or ID. So when you use a class like this, for example, paragraph that have a class of about, and I go to my styling and do p.about, I give it the color of red. This will affect only the p tag that contains the about class. So this is very useful for us in CSS. Now, the main selectors that we have in CSS, we have a lot of selectors, but these are the main selectors, which are the element selector. Element selector, we select either the div, the span, the p, the h1 tag, etc. And you can also use the class selector to select elements in your web page by using the dots followed by the class name. So if you have a class of highlights, then you have to include dot highlights. This will affect all the elements with tags with class of highlights in your web page. You can also use the ID selector, which will use the hash symbol. The ID selector uses the ID attributes of an HTML element to select a specific element. So when you have the ID of about, in your CSS, you precede it by hash or the pound symbol. We also have the attribute selector. I'll be using this in this webinar practical. When we have different kind of inputs in our web page, and you have input type of text, you want to affect only the elements that have input type of text. This will affect any input tag that have a type of text using the attribute selector. So this type is an attribute in HTML. Type equals to text, as we have seen yesterday when we were doing form. Let me now talk explicitly on classes. HTML has two attributes that make CSS even more useful, which is class and ID. So the class, when defining a style for elements with a particular class attribute in the style sheets, you declare a role using the dots followed by the class name to limit the style to a particular element with that class attributes. Now use a selector combining the tag name with a dot followed immediately by the class name. For example, if you have a class that has shade, so what you will do in your CSS is to go to your CSS and select dot shade. Dot shade means that what? You are selecting you are trying to select elements that have the shade class in your HTML elements. So you can now say dot shade, then background color yellow. Instead of you selecting the element tag itself, like paragraph or div or h1 or h5 and so on, you can use the class selector to select the elements from the web page. This is an instance there. You have a p tag that has a class of shade. You just go to your CSS and say dot shade, or to be specific, you will say p dot shade background red. The same way we did for class is also applicable to ID. IDs are similar to classes, but IDs are unique. You know, you can have multiple class names in your page, but it is not professional, or it is not ideal to have more than one ID on a web page. So IDs are unique. They can only be used with one instance of an element within a document. If you have more than one IDs in your code, you are going to have an error when you are trying to use it for the back-end programming of your website. So it is very good you have a unique ID throughout the web page. Now, when defining a CSS rule using an ID-based selector, they use the hash symbol, hash sign, or pound, or number, or sharp character, depends on what is being called in your country, followed by the style name. To limit the style to a particular element with that ID attribute, use a selector combining the tag name with a hash and then the ID name. For instance, let's say you have H1 that has ID equals intro. Then, to be specific about it, you can use the selector followed by the hash intro. Then, this will affect the H1 alone, or you just say hash intro alone. We have CSS display in our web page. We have the block display and the inline display. Every element on a web page is a rectangular box. The display property in CSS determines just how that rectangular box behaves. So for every element in your web page, they appear in a rectangular format. Like this is a block 1, block 2, block 2. Let's say this is an element, an element. They appear as block. But we can change the display property using the CSS display property to change it to either inline or inline block. So you can see if this is block, now inline means that they are on the same line. So this and this have now been stretched to the same line. Then this one, the same line, inline, inline, inline. So we can change the display property of our elements on our web page using the display property. I will show us this in the practical aspects of the webinar. Now, what is span and div? Span and div are two tags that are particularly useful when using CSS. Span and div are both container tags that have minimal formatting associated with them. The span is an inline element that simply holds text without doing anything special to it, while the div tag is a block element and causes the text to enclose it and start on a new line. When you have a div wrap around your elements, it's going to make sure that this div occupies the whole width of the browser and force the elements to come to a new line. Unlike span, which goes in the same line called inline. Using span and div tags in conjunction with classes and IDs allows for great flexibility in creating pages. Now, you have to understand the CSS box model for you to understand how padding and margin work. The CSS box model is a container that contains multiple properties, including borders, margin, padding, and the content itself. Now, I said I'm going to explain padding and margin to us. Now, look at this particular image I have here. Let's say this is the content of my elements. Let's say H1, for instance. Then I give the H1 a border of black. Now, when I give padding to the H1, the content will have padding in between the border and the contents. But if I give the elements a margin, then the spaces of the margin will come outside the border and the external elements. So margin will give space outside the element itself, while padding will give space inside the element itself to the contents of the elements. Good. CSS layouts. CSS layout is easy to design. We can use CSS layout to design our web page, such as home page, contact us, about us, etc. By default, HTML tends to put everything in one column, which is not ideal. If you remember our website that we created, let me just go there now. This is the website we created yesterday. You can see this element is in just one column. We only have one column here throughout. So with CSS layout, we can have different columns, like a column here, a column here. Like look at my sample website that I've just created here. Now, this is a column. This is a column here. This is a column here. This is a column here. CSS layout has helped us to have these three columns. Unlike when you just use your ordinary HTML, which is default, everything tends to stay in one column, which is not ideal. There has been many proposals to CSS to address this issue, such as tables, flex div and flex or grid. Now look at this web page here. You have the header, the menu, the contents, main, content, and footer. This is having three columns, 1, 2, 3. This is having just one row, a row, a row. So with CSS layout, you can achieve this layout using CSS. So these are what you'll be doing in this webinar. I will just go back to the slide, to the browser again. Look at this service page. You can see this layout here. We have a column here, a column here. So this is what you'll be doing. Now, how to center a div. How to center a div is a nightmare for developers. Honestly, we all struggle with CSS and try to find our peace with it. We have all found ourselves frustrated with centering things in CSS. Centering divs can be hard sometimes. So I've used these 4 ways to center a div vertically and horizontally. Firstly, you can use display flex, justify content, and align items on a parent in CSS to center our elements to the center of a page. We can also use the position attributes, the position property to center our elements at the center of our page using the top, left, and transform property. The third way again is by using the display grid. Display grid can also justify our content to the center and align content to the center using this display grid method. Or you just use a width on a child, then give it a margin auto. This will center the elements at the center of your web page. So that is the end of my CSS slides. When we return back, we will begin the webinar practical. So as this webinar is, we'll be having a 15 minutes break at 12 p.m. At 12:15 p.m., we will be back. So please, do you have questions? Questions?
Hello?
Yes. Hello, sir.
Hello?
Hello, sir.
Hello?
Hello, I am with you, sir.
My name is Andrew. My name is Andrew.
Okay, Mr. Andrew, welcome, sir.
Please, is there no shortcut that someone can use to do some of this instead of this or the long, at least as technology and software as there's supposed to be something that can give someone a shortcut that can make everything more easier and seamless.
Yes.
What is the purpose of those Laravel, PHP, if this thing is still complex like this? What is the purpose of one server and live server if this thing is still complex at the end of the day?
Okay, let me take
What is the purpose of this React? What is the purpose of React if this thing is still complex?
Okay, let me take it one by one. There is nothing complex here. This is just the foundation. We have frameworks that know this development work. This development work is this development work has been made easier for us every good day. Many technologies are coming out, they are coming out. So all these technologies are based on a foundation. So if you have the solid understanding of this basic now, you will be able to blend well with the framework that has been developed for us to make things easier for us. For instance, you were asking that, okay, why is this thing so complex when we know we can do something simpler? Yes, look at CSS. CSS have a framework, or CSS has a framework which is called Bootstrap. Bootstrap CSS. You don't need to write CSS code to make your website responsive or to make it have effects to what you wanted. But this Bootstrap we are talking about, they were built upon HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So what if your Bootstrap that you are trying to use, you want to try to manipulate or you want to have a custom edit on the Bootstrap that the developers have created for us to use our work? You have to be able to understand the foundation of it so that you can easily go to the Bootstrap and tweak some things inside the Bootstrap documentations. And it's going to have a custom effect for you, for your design, for your layout. Talking about Laravel, all this stuff, they are framework. Each languages have their framework that has made things easier. For instance, CSS has its own framework which makes CSS easier, like Bootstrap. JavaScript has its own framework too, like jQuery, that makes things easier. So library means that you write lesser code to achieve a bigger solution. So you write a lesser code to solve a problem. That's the major function of framework, just to ease your development work. Now, when you are talking about Laravel, that one is for PHP. PHP has its own framework too that makes PHP code to be written in a very short way. Now, I'm talking about React and so on, and so all these things, they are libraries of JavaScript. So libraries are different from framework. Framework is just to make things easier for us.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, is there any way someone can merge all the front end together?
Is there any other way, what, sir?
Any way that someone can merge all the three together to make it. Is there any software that can merge the three together?
Yes, there's no way you can merge the three together, but I think there is this content management software called CMS, called WordPress. WordPress. You must have heard about WordPress.
Okay.
WordPress is a website builder that has already made things easier for developers too. The front end, the back end, and the logic are already implemented in WordPress.
Okay.
But when you use WordPress, you won't have, when you use WordPress, you won't have the full control of your website because you are working based upon someone's development work. But when you build your web page from scratch using frameworks or from scratch by hard coding it, you get to have a full control of your websites other than using a WordPress website, which works, you can hardly customize it. And if you want to customize a WordPress website, that means you have to go back to your knowledge of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and PHP for you to be able to have a custom design of your WordPress, because WordPress is made by someone. So you have to follow its rules. But if you want to bypass the rule of WordPress, you have to understand the concept that I'm talking about here, the concept of the basic web development skills like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So this webinar is to enlighten us on the basic web development skills that is going to enhance you with future development work in your career. That is why the ladder back down has brought this medium for us so that I can impart to us the basic understanding of web tools, website development tools, which is HTML, CSS, JavaScript are the basic tools to build any web development projects. When you say framework, all those frameworks were built upon these skills. When you say WordPress, WordPress too were built upon these skills. Just that you are going to write a lesser code or lesser work when you are using these tools to aid your work. I hope that is clear. But with coding it from scratch, you get to have a custom design and a custom layout of what you wanted. If you want, like, see it as like this, like you want to build a house. Okay, I'm in my house. I want to have my kitchen to be very wide and to be at this location. I want my bedroom to be very wide and to be at this particular spot. I want my garage to be at the front of my, you have a custom view of what you want to do because you are building from scratch. Unlike when you go out there to buy a house in estates, the house has been built for you. All you need to do is just pack in your luggage and bag inside the house. You can't say that I don't want the way this kitchen is. This kitchen should not be here. It should be here. No, the house has been built for you, so you cannot customize it. Except you can you demolish the house and then build again. You understand? So that is how framework works. Framework has been made for us to make things easier. But if you don't want to go there, so if you want to have a custom design of your website, then you start from scratch, which is good. You know how to start from scratch. But if you have the framework already there, if you know how to write code, you can easily customize a framework tools that you are using. I hope that is clear. So thank you, everyone. So I'm just going to